are supportive, so things go up and down, and we're hoping that there's not going to be a problem. And in fact, when we did it, since we did a lot of research about how to do that, we're passing it on to all the pension funds we're involved in and raising the issue. People do respect nurses. We found that out everywhere we go. So we use that leverage that we have, the trust of the public, to push progressive agenda. We also have a curriculum for the nurses around climate change and the negative health impacts. You know, heat waves, what happens there? Droughts. I mean, the incredible drought in the West Coast and in Puerto Rico last year devastated populations. People die as a result of these things. Extreme weather events. Some of our members can actually explain why increased coastal snowstorms are a result of global warming, which is always a question. Say, as soon as it snows, they say, well, you said there was global warming. What does that mean? And we have in our curriculum a way to explain it. Also floods, hurricanes, and so forth. So the other thing we were able to do, because everyone here knows who the Koch brothers, I don't know what my audience is. Your students, teachers, what are you people, students? The Koch brothers, I'm sorry, I usually like to know who I'm talking. The Koch brothers, right? They have a big share of New York Presbyterian Hospital, where we have 3,000 nurses, and they're kind of public enemy number one on many levels. Well, we said they are also these big fossil fuel people, and making those connections for people was really important to see that the enemies of the planet are the enemies that we deal with every day in our communities and in our hospitals. This is an ongoing process. I could not say that we have all these nurses ready and willing to understand a lot of these issues. My real point is that if you want to build a movement to divest, you also have to build a movement about what the issues are among people who may not be aware of these issues. And we have found that nobody knew, hardly anyone had knowledge of climate, except people who were near a fracking well and had experienced that. People, of course, in Hurricane Sandy, but we had to connect those dots, and assorted other things. So we're in a process now of moving other people, moving our members, and moving ourselves away from fossil fuels. We don't have a lot of money, so I don't think we're really going to hit them where it hurts, but on an ideological level and a political level, we're making progress. So thank you.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Liz Krueger, and I'm a member of the New York State Senate. And I am here, I think, because I sponsor the bill to have the New York State pension system divest from the same 200 largest fossil fuel companies, in the country, in the world. And I guess to put a little bit of a sort of political spin on all this. First, I appreciate everything that everyone already spoke about. I want to highlight our last speaker, the importance of being able to talk about it in ways that people understand. Because you say divestment, okay, it's taking money out of certain things. You know, I've had the ongoing argument. So if New York State or CUNY divested their funds from not being in these 200 oil companies, fossil fuel companies, somebody else would buy the stock. What's the difference? And the answer, because it's true, I'm pretty sure somebody else would buy the stock. I'm not even 100% sure any specific entity divesting could significantly impact the value of the stock because these companies are so enormous. But it is actually part of a much larger assignment for all of us, and I think that the other speakers were getting to that also. Climate change and the need for people in this country, as well as every other country in the world, to radically shift how we approach the climate change problems we're facing has to be in a multi-pronged, yesterday, speed it up, keep going faster in the right direction movement. So is it a magic bullet for CUNY to divest, for the nurses to divest, for New York State, which actually is technically one of the largest stockholders in the world? Our state controller, since it's a one-person control of the state pension funds, he's like the biggest investor in the world. You know, he's bigger than all those billionaires you know about. And so we have about $180 billion in the state pension fund and about $5 billion invested in these 200 fossil fuels companies. So the continuing debate some of my colleagues are having with the Controller's Office, who is doing many great things on the environment and on investing, but doesn't accept that we ought to outlaw his ability to invest in these fossil fuel funds. And they continue to say somebody will own those stocks anyway, and we have a fiduciary responsibility to the pensioners to make sure we're getting the best return on our dollar. So what I would like to say is, while it's not the magic bullet, it sends a hell of a message if the state of New York, if the city of New York, if our major academic institutions, if our major labor unions all say, no, we're not putting our money in your companies. We're not putting an expectation of our future in your companies, because your companies aren't the future. And in fact, the longer you're around and doing what you're doing, the less of a future the rest of us are likely to have. So it ends up being, or I think it's important that it ends up being just a part of the much larger discussion, and that you need to talk about it, and somebody just said, in fiduciary responsibility lingo. So what does that mean? So pension funds are intended to be there for when people retire so that they have money to live on in their retirement. So the nurses, they're dependent on their pension fund having adequate money for when they retire. State workers are, CUNY and SUNY workers are. We want the investments for our future to be smart. Well, guess what? It's not smart to invest in fossil fuel anymore. Coal's plummeting and is never coming back. Other fossil fuel stocks are starting to plummet and are never going to get back to where they were. There's this lingo I only learned when I started working on this, stranded assets, that a lot of the smart people in economic investments for pensions talk about. Well, if there's no future in fossil fuels, if they're actually helping to destroy the world, if these companies literally are only in that business, it's not like they have 52 other businesses and some fossil fuel over there. These 200 companies, this is what they do, fossil fuels. You invest in them, and frankly, they're dying as an industry because the world is getting smarter and or more desperate, and there are many more sustainable options coming forward as we speak. Investing in those stocks is poor economic planning, right? Just like going out to the market and saying, oh, coal's low, I think I'll buy some coal stock now, would be a really stupid thing to do. Because dirty coal ain't coming back as the future of energy anytime, and thank goodness. So I like to talk about the fact that it makes a huge statement when the Rockefeller family, Standard Oil, you know them? When they divested the Rockefeller family funds from fossil fuels, okay, did it change the economics of the world? No. Did it send a hell of a message? Yes, it did. Right? If the city of New York divested from fossil fuels, that would be an unbelievable statement to the country and to the world. There are other countries, other cities, other municipalities, other universities who are going down this road. One by one, it continues to send the message. And I've also been fascinated with the debate, and I've had it with many, but if we're the investors, we can be activist investors and sit on their boards and make them change what they're doing. Well, I think activist investing is a really fascinating movement, and on many topics, you can actually move the needle, right? If you are a large investor in X company and their treatment of their workers is terrible, you can start a movement to force them to change the treatment of their workers. I buy that. There's any number of things you can do with stockholder activism. You can't get fossil fuel companies to stop being fossil fuel companies. Activism at the investor level isn't going to work. Pulling all our money out and putting it in alternative options will work. Supporting sustainable energy options will work. I guess I will also just throw in the conflict between, or what is often seen as the conflict between what's good for business and what's important and what's good for the environment. And my most recent example of we're not even talking about this right is there are groups that score legislators on their votes in any given year in the legislature. So there's one group who does environmental scores. It's not called Environmental Advocates, it's a sister organization. So I'm really proud of the fact that I have a very high score from this group. And I was looking at all of my colleagues and where they fell from really good scores to really bad scores. And then there's this other group, they call themselves Unshackle New York, Unshackle Upstate, and they claim to be the business lobby. And it's the exact opposite scores. So I'm like 5th from the bottom of 213 legislators for Unshackle Upstate, and like 5th from the top for environmental. But every single person is like that. I'm like, okay, we're not talking about this right. Because in fact, if you talk about smart, sustainable, environmental types of jobs, and there's lots of jobs in sustainable energy and sustainable models of environmental business, you are talking about job creation. You are talking about getting people good paying jobs. So the absurdity of some of us getting trapped in false dialogue and false arguments that if you're for the environment, if you're for attacking climate change, if you're for divestment from fossil fuels, that must mean you're anti-jobs, you're anti-good wages, you're anti-economic development. I'll just say au contraire. So I'm glad you're all doing this work. I'm delighted to be here. I'm telling you, the discussion has to be much bigger than just the question of divestment of pension funds. But I will say, because I completely agree with the CUNY and SUNY communities, because there's also a movement in SUNY, to get your monies out of these fossil fuel companies, that Senator Brad Hoylman, who couldn't be here tonight, and myself are just about to introduce a bill requiring divestment from SUNY and CUNY of these fossil fuel companies. Now, your boards won't like that, and they will tell us that the state legislature has no business telling them what to do with their investments and their fiduciary responsibility. And actually, maybe if we pass the law, they might actually even win in court. I'm not sure. I don't think so, because they're state universities, right? We created them. And we tell them lots of other things they should and shouldn't do. And so I'm actually pretty comfortable taking the stab at saying, you can do it yourselves. That would be the right answer. All of you have been asking them to. But if they don't, we actually think it's fiduciarily the correct thing for CUNY and SUNY to pull out of these 200 fossil fuel companies. So come January, which is the new legislative session, assuming Senator Brad Hoylman and Senator Liz Krueger are reelected and returned to the Senate. And I'm confident, but I think that will happen for both of us. We are going to introduce this bill, and I do not believe we'll find too much trouble finding assembly members to join us with introducing the bill in the other house. Probably went over the 5 minutes, but you didn't hold up stop, so I'm okay. So happy to just take questions. Thank you.
For the speakers. I wanted to just actually take liberty of being moderator for 1 second and show you something, and that is one of our CUNY colleagues is a member of a union organization called Trade Unions for Energy Democracy. This picks up on Senator Krueger's point about how this is a broad struggle and one that is inherently political, so that divesting isn't just going to solve all of our problems. There's a much broader kind of struggle that we need to engage in. So this is an international organization that's pushing issues of energy democracy, of which I think the struggle for divestment should be seen as a kind of essential part. Sean Sweeney is the person who I was mentioning, who's involved in the CUNY Center for Worker Education, and wrote a platform document for trade unions for energy democracy. So if you have a chance, please check this website out. Okay, so can we take some questions for any or all of our speakers?
And will you introduce yourself when you stand up? Any questions?
We did a great job, apparently.
Okay.
Which legislation, I'm sorry?
The bill that we put in last year to...
Oh, the actual divestment, yes.
Beyond divestment, but to
Climate.
calling for a climate energy policy in New York State, a clean energy policy.
The one that passed the Assembly.
Oh, the Assembly climate change bill, okay. Great.
Amalgamated bank is divesting. So we have an option of bank to go to in New York. I think there for many years, but if you haven't, you can transfer your funds to amalgamated and congratulate them for their good work. It's actually really happened to the first bank to do that.
Great. I'm glad to hear. You know, Amalgamated sort of falls out of the norm for banks on a lot of their policies on worker rights and consumer protections. So kudos to them, right, for actually taking the leap. You know, I don't have the bigger, more important, careful here, climate change bill with me, so I'm hesitant to say sections blah, blah, blah. But it was an attempt by many environmental organizations working together with progressive legislators to come up with a bill that would actually, if it passed, radically change the direction of New York State's commitment to climate change by creating a whole series of standards and goals of where New York State needed to be by certain years. So in fairness to the governor, and I'm not famous for saying kudos to the governor. In fact, he would say he very rarely hears that. But he has done two really big things for energy and climate change, I believe. He has made a commitment that by 2030, 50% of the energy produced in New York State will be sustainable. Now that would actually, I think, probably put us ahead of any other state in the country if we got there. The devil's in the details, though. How do you get there? You need to get there through changes in your laws and your regulations and the mandates you place on people in the energy industry in our state. So, overly simplified, the climate change bill is an attempt to codify us getting there and further than 50% by 2030. Also, to the credit of the governor, and I don't even know that the press covered it. I guess it's been so busy with the UN week and explosions and everything else going wrong in the world, and Donald Trump, who seems to absorb all media at all times. The governor actually in the state of New York came out with a commitment for a major investment in offshore wind power. And one of the ways we are going to move the needle and change the formula of having sustainable options in energy in our future is to shift to major kilowatt models of sustainability. And solar's fabulous, and wind on land. Wind is fabulous, but we're here in New York City. And so in urban New York and Long Island and Westchester, the sustainable forms of energy that will actually get us where we need to go, not necessarily just on land wind or solar, but offshore wind can produce an unbelievable return on the dollar. Europe is way ahead of us. Many of us have been begging New York State to go down this road, and they announced that they are committed to that and are going to do at least one project starting almost immediately. It's 30 miles south of Montauk, but I can't remember the term that was used of the area that the federal government has approved us doing this. And why does 30 miles matter? Well, interestingly, 30 miles seems to matter because there are people who believe in these goals, but didn't want to stand on a beach and see turbines. You can't see a turbine 30 miles out. And
Learned something.
there you go. I just learned this also. In fact, even if you're 6.5 feet tall, the farthest you can see a turbine is 15 miles out. Because I was talking to a man who was 6.5 feet tall last night who was an expert on this. I wouldn't know what 6.5 feet tall felt like in my wildest dreams. So there are actually some very good things on our horizon. But again, going back to tie it with this, why are we investing in fossil fuel? Shouldn't we be looking at investing in offshore wind power? Shouldn't we, right? Shouldn't we be looking at investing in alternative sustainable models of energy? You know, there's some not so great debates taking place as well, which also tie into climate change. I know that I'm quite opposed to the governor's plan to have ratepayers subsidize the continued running of 3 nuclear power plants in this state, who actually are not economically feasible, and they're all threatening to close. And I'm like, hooray, let them close. And there are many people who take the position, we can't replace that energy fast enough and we need to keep them alive. And the only way to keep them alive is if we actually subsidize nuclear power plants. I personally believe very strongly that's the wrong decision. But it also goes back to the point of one of the earlier speakers about like thinking through what are we encouraging, what are we allowing, what are we outlawing, and how are we using our money. So I just lost my train of thought, sorry. So I don't believe we should be investing in nuclear. I do think we should be exploring as rapidly as we can offshore wind as a realistic option. Oh, I know, I was going to say. You, I think, were quoting the dollars that you're used to subsidize fossil fuels in this country at the national level.
674 billion.
Well, New York State has tax exemptions and abatements all over the place, and 900 million of them are for petroleum products. And every year I'm like, why would we in 2016 offer tax abatements for the use of petroleum products? We all know that we want to get everybody off petroleum products. Abatements, exemptions are to encourage people's activity. Right? You want to talk about abatements and exemptions for people to go green, for industries to shift from fossil fuels to non-fossil fuels? Come talk to me. $900 million a year of taxpayer money going to subsidize petroleum products in New York State. It's not acceptable. But that was a lousy explanation of that one bill, which did pass the Assembly and did not pass the Senate. Excuse me.
Would any of the other speakers like to comment on that bill specifically?
You mean the $900 million?
No, the
New York
climate
Renews.
change bill that
Yeah.
passed the Assembly.
There is going to be a renewed push for it this year.
Absolutely.
Okay,
So anyone wants to
Right.
great. Thank you for letting us know.
Yeah. And just technically, because it's a new legislative session, right? The elections are in November. We all go back as new legislators. That bill will have to be reintroduced both houses. It will have to pass the Assembly again, and then take a try at the Senate. And to be partisan for a moment, if we have a Democratic majority, we stand a whole lot better chance of passing that bill in the Senate.
Senate's a problem.
We can talk.
Okay.
So wondering.
Yeah, any other questions? Or Anna would like to say a word.
We weren't able to have Michaela Petchel from the Columbia Divest group come because she had a medical injury. She wanted to let you know that there are ways to support Columbia Divest as well, really quickly. And in addition to that, there's a lot of other opportunities at CUNY Divest to participate. She said that the advisory committee at Columbia University released a proposal for divesting from tar sands, which will likely be organizing events around in the near future, so we can support them in that way. They're also planning on having a rally in support of the Sacred Stones Camp within the next few weeks, and will be collecting supplies to send to the camp. Additionally, they have a Facebook page, Columbia Divest for Climate Justice. And then one last quick thing, in terms of participating on a global level, right now, after being in the investment forum with the United Nations, S&P, I don't know if you guys know who that is, Standard & Poor's, is currently has a proposal for environmental, social, and governance assessments, and they're taking comments. So if you're interested in making comments on that, the email addresses of the individuals who are taking comment on that are here. And then additionally, Standard & Poor will be introducing global ratings for environmental risk profile assessment factors on future investments. So if you're interested in that kind of information, I have a lot of it, and you're welcome to it.
And I'm sorry, I also just got a text from Helen Rosenthal that she apologizes very much. She got trapped in a community issue on the Upper West Side and had said, should I leave now for here? And I suggested not.
Yeah.
Because given the reality of getting around Manhattan, you'd all be hanging out till 9 p.m. hoping Helen made it across town. So she apologizes, and just for people who don't know her, she's a fabulous city council member. And she's been carrying a very similar bill to the state divestment bill for the New York City pension funds, of which there are 3 separate ones, but it's a very similar set of arguments. It would just be legally a different way to go into divestment there.
Please thank her for her efforts to join us.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I will text her back.
Okay, thanks. Further questions?
I'd just like to make a comment.
Okay.
The comment is that we have certain peculiar dynasties here which are very beholden to the oil interests. I'm thinking of the Bush dynasty, and 41st and 43rd president, obviously, and the war in Iraq, which we know now was a put-up job. People should read Richard Clarke, who was the counterterrorism czar under 8 presidents, and he noted that he quit, I should say, just before the invasion of Iraq, because he found it unconscionable that going after Iraq when Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And this is a guy that was there for Clarke with an E. And there are a lot of books written on the subject. We seem to have a foreign policy that's oil-driven with the Saudis. We're sort of unique in that respect, more so than any other nation. Of course, they're the Koch brothers who inherited all that oil wealth. And Cheney, of course, the largest oil drilling firm and spare part company on the planet. Sole beneficiary of a no bid contract to so-called rebuild Iraq. And it was so corrupt that when threatened with legal action, they moved to Dubai. So we have some peculiar dynasties here which have shaped our politics in a very bad way with respect to dealing with this issue fundamentally, which other countries do not have, and that's why the point was made that European countries are ahead of us on fossil fuel and divestment. Germany, of course, they're getting rid of nuclear, and there are some days this past summer they were getting 40 or 50% of their energy from non-fossil fuel burning sources. So they're ahead in many respects.
Well, even in Norway, which has had enormous income from North Sea oil for many, many years, the country of Norway, recognizing this is the wrong way to go into our future, has been shifting from oil to offshore wind. And their pension system in Norway is actually the most interesting in the world to me. They have a whole series of tests about whether their pension funds can be invested in a company. And it includes where are they environmentally, where are they on workers' rights, where are they on human rights. And it doesn't matter whether the company's in Norway or any other country in the world, it has to go through a separate independent panel which will then approve or not approve whether this company can be invested in by the country of Norway's pension. And it's one of the largest international pension funds for workers in the world. And they have extremely high standards. And what they've seen is other pension funds around other parts of the world who don't have the same rules will actually look at Norway's pension fund and only invest in companies that can meet the sort of good housekeeping approval of Norway. And it's a really, I suggested we take a stab at it here, and I have to say most of my colleagues in government looked at me like I was insane. Like, no, that's not how we do things. We do what Wall Street says here. Like, that's been a problem, hasn't it? But it's a really interesting, following on your point about international politics and what happens in the world and war and peace and who dies and who doesn't. Actually holding yourself as government and as institutions to a certain set of standards of where you will and won't invest your pension monies and what's okay and not okay can have really fascinating and huge consequences. I know the Norwegian government, because I went to a panel and they were explaining it to me, was shocked that all these other countries were saying, well, thank you, because we don't want to spend all that money doing all that work, but we really respect what you're doing, we really like the standards you're using, and we're just going to steal all your information.
I think that this is a really crucial issue, that this is why I think the issue of energy democracy is so important, right? I mean, there's this idea of the resource curse, you know, that countries that have a great deal of petroleum resources tend to turn into kleptocracies because you have a small elite who have access to immense wealth, which they can ship out very quickly and stash away in Swiss banks, right? So there's a kind of coincidence or overlap of oil reserves and the degree of corruption of a country. Usually these are only seen as countries in the global south, but you know, one might think about the corruption of democracy in the United States and the way it's linked to our long history of maintaining access or getting access to cheap oil. And so what we do as we divest and where we invest is going to be really important, right? And how it's going to change, you know, the kind of dynamics of democracy on the ground is really crucial. I wanted to ask a specific question, though, about how we might move forward the efforts of CUNY Divest and other divestment organizations at other institutions of higher education here in the city. I mean, one of my hopes in getting together the panel was to be able to avoid being sort of siloed in our individual institutions and learn from one another. I'm sad that the person from Columbia couldn't come, but I do hope we'll be able to link up with them moving forward. And to prepare for tonight's panel, I read some of the response of the sort of equivalent of the Board of Trustees financial committee that CUNY Divest presented forward at Columbia. And what the Columbia entity said was that basically we can't divest from this group of 200 fossil fuel companies because in that basket of 200 are some very egregious polluters. You know, there's some coal companies, and clearly we shouldn't have investments there. But there are also some natural gas companies, and we've just shifted our campus, you know, furnaces from being whatever coal-fired to natural gas-fired or petroleum-based to natural gas, and that's the cleanest energy we have access to now. So we can't bundle all these things together. And so while we wait for the clean energy transition to happen, we just need to educate people. So that's what we're going to do. And so they completely, fobbed off the Columbia Divest movement by saying that. I'd like to hear from Anna and Tony maybe about, what the rationale at this meeting of the CUNY Board of Trustees was for not proceeding forward with divestment plans. And then I'd love it if, folks who are gathered here or some of our panelists could, think about what kind of concrete steps we could take to really move the struggle forward in terms of getting institutions of higher education to divest. Do we need to turn to more dramatic forms of activism than walking? Maybe we need to lie down somewhere where our bodies will be in the way. So just sort of thoughts about how to go forward.
Well, I just want to say that I've been attending, last semester I was attending Columbia Barna Divest meetings. They're pretty extensive. They were planning a sit-in, which they then called off. The term just started there, so they usually meet Monday nights. I mean, anyone can really go. We can put on the CUNY Divest where the meetings are. So that I think we should be working together in concert on these issues. Same thing with NYU. I've attended one or two sessions there, but mainly Columbia. And we need a concerted effort here, okay, on these issues.
Regarding CUNY's divestment, I actually spoke with Edith Everett. She was a Board of Trustee member when they divested from tobacco in the 1990s. And her suggestion was that it's no longer a financial issue. We had gone through the Finance Committee, but that we could potentially get the Board of Trustees to vote on it by taking it through a different committee, like Educational Committee, a committee that was interested in potentially like the health of our students or the education. One of the main arguments that they had against divesting was that the funds that are in our investment mutual indices were supporting scholarships for students, and what they didn't actually, they didn't read the information, because what we've known for years now is that the prices in oil as well as coal was going to go down. So we've probably lost money. They refused to give us the actual information about how much they had, but CUNY Divest, our economics major, estimated that it was $8.6 million in those top 200 fossil fuel companies. So the next steps we're going to be taking is, one, hopefully supporting the bill at the Senate level to get SUNY and CUNY divested from fossil fuels, but also at our own university, the University Student Senate, which is one of the student governing bodies, is going to continue to work towards getting a resolution to our board and getting more of their attention. As well as, who knows, we'll see what kind of protests come up, because my recommendation initially was to go through the right channels, which is appeal to the Board of Trustees. They're the ones that can make the decision. And oddly enough, if you watch the rest of the video from Cambridge Associates, when they talked to our board, my favorite comment was that while they were standing there, they basically said, we're not sure if this is the board that's going to be making this decision. And I thought that was kind of funny, because I don't think they realized, or they did their homework, and who was actually making that decision. But that was the committee that would be recommending it to the board. And so my recommendations in the future are going to be that maybe this investment company is not really the best place for us to put our money. And actually, there are plenty of other investment companies that are doing sustainable type work and who would respect the institution that we are at, and also recognize who is making the decisions. Because it was kind of shameful, I think, for them to not even recognize that. So.
Yeah, but 3 times the University Senate passed resolutions calling for divestment. 3 times. And they just, what do they want? They want more action, I guess. In Columbia, for instance, the undergraduate body voted 3 years ago, 73% to divest from fossil fuels. So the sentiment is there. The majority sentiment is there. It's a question of political will. And obviously, there are well-connected trustees, as there are those dynasties I alluded to earlier, that are very influential, especially in a financial capital like New York City. So I think that's holding it up, although you are working in the right place on the state legislature to change this
But
climate.
also, to go back to your statement about talking to the right investment, I guess, experts. There are several companies now who actually only do energy investments in those, not in those 200 fossil fuel companies. And they have produced some really excellent analysis of how both current and in projected future, what percentage is up and down, that they're going to do, that they know that they can prove that they would do better than investing in the 200 fossil fuel companies. So just use as an example, ExxonMobil. So the New York State Attorney General, and along with several other attorney generals in the country, are in a major legal dispute with ExxonMobil about when they told the truth to government and their own stockholders and how much they were lying. And now they have the SEC, now the SEC has gotten involved. And no, the SEC doesn't work the way I want it to. That's a separate question. But you actually have government entities starting to say, this company has flunked its fiduciary responsibilities to its own stockholders, to the public. It has lied to the government. I think, to quote one of the attorney generals, they knew how much damage they were doing. They've actually hired all the world's experts to work for them. They just wouldn't let them tell anyone how bad it was. So there are, and maybe it's time to get some of this documentation in front of the board and say, we just don't think you're getting the right financial analysis. A section of the bill that I carry in the Senate and Felix Ortiz carries in the Assembly, and we're going to have the same language in the CUNY bill. It actually has a safety valve where if, in the divestment bill for the controller, if the controller's people determine that selling off any of these 200 fossil fuel stocks would actually put the pensioners' money at risk, it gives them a safety valve to extend X number of additional years before they sell. Because what I kept being told was, well, you can't expect us to sell off $5 billion worth of stocks that may be in a negative place to do that, even though the legislation gives them 5 years to sell off $5 billion. So for the record, it's $160 to $180 billion pension fund. You got 5 years to shift your investments in $5 billion, which is like $1 billion a year to round things. I bet they do buy and sell at least $1 billion worth of stocks on $160, $180 billion pension fund. But I was like, okay, I don't want to be the one who has to go explain to pensioners 20 years ago, yeah, I passed a bill and now you don't get to eat. That's not actually my plan either. So fine, we'll build in what we call a safety valve, where if your experts can actually document that the selling of this particular stock at this particular time would be a serious economic mistake, all right, we'll give you more time, and we'll trust your expertise, because he's the controller of the state of New York, and we constitutionally treat him as if he is the expert and should be trusted. So I think there are lots of ways that you can do this by an individual university, or by the state of New York or the city of New York. But I do think there are experts out there who can sit there with a straight face and quote the numbers backwards and forwards and do an excellent job of showing people you're actually not going to lose money by getting out of this 200 fossil fuel companies.
Yes, a question.
So luckily, it's not just CUNY that's involved in this campaign. There's been a larger national movement, like our Matthew Sapienza was saying. So 350.org has actually been doing a really great job of kind of reinvigorating that. They've, I think, released a film. We're going to try to get them connected with our Hunter Sustainability Club, which is actually really active on our campus in terms of recycling, and the Green Initiative Fund, which funds students who want to do green projects, and we're happy to help them write that as well. Grants for those types of projects. But it's difficult, I think, for student movements. But I think if we look into the past, we've seen that student movements have made big changes. And in particular, the last 2 times that CUNY has divested from particular companies, sometimes it takes time. So I think that most of the students kind of know that, and we've put in place resolutions that will help students look at the information and kind of catch up from what we've done, and then be able to move forward with that. So,
If I could just add one thing to that, I mean, I think we're, well, as Tony started out by saying, we're living in very trying times, and the future certainly looks dark and quite terrifying in some ways, but it's also a moment of very exciting resurgence of social movements around the country. I mean, often in response to horrible conditions, and I'm thinking, specifically of Black Lives Matter. But one of the great developments is that a movement like Black Lives Matter is standing up in solidarity with the struggle against the Dakota Access Pipeline, right? And sort of seeing the relationship between racialized communities in the United States sort of broadly, and the need to organize together. So I think there's a real kind of potential for connecting movements against, police violence and against extreme extraction, and for divestment, and making those kinds of links, and getting students involved. Of course, I'd love to see more students involved in the divestment movement. So it's, I think, a question of the kind of education that Judy was pointing out, that we need to really sort of do, and, to hope that the students will be educating themselves and coming to this movement with those kinds of connections in mind.
This gentleman over there.
The Black Lives Matter platform also included a demand for fossil fuel divestment.
Yes, right. Exactly. It's exactly those kinds of connections that I'm thinking about. Thank you.
I just want to say, you have to look for opportunities as a faculty member. We had no student newspaper for a time, so I just wanted to pull this out. So I recruited the editor-in-chief in one of my classes, and we went for money, and we got the money. And this was the first issue of the newspaper in 2014. I made sure that this was the lead story. I mean, it's hard, but it can be done. It can be done. You have to look for the opportunities, the niches where you can fulfill your aims within the campus and within the college community, there are many opportunities. We get boxed in with committee work and everything else, but we've got to think outside the box. The Parsonian box, if you're a sociologist, of course.
Thank God there's academics here. Smithsonian box, wow.
Yes.
Tim Martin with BMCC. First, thanks to the panel for taking the time out to be here, and also to the BMCC affiliated members. So thank you. But my question, I guess, is targeted more towards Anna, since your experience with student organizing, having just come from Long Island University and been a part of that whole lockout thing, and helping to organize the students at LIU. It was really good to see the PSC representation out there, President Bolin out there. So that was really eye-opening experience personally, and it was really interesting to see the overlap in a lot of the organizing communities. I mean, there was a carpenters union out there, in addition to the CUNY system, PSC, and other unions. So my question is have you seen any trends in overlap in communities that I guess kind of are willing to kind of
help each other
step across lines and be supportive of things like this? Are there communities that
So I would say yes. I know that we have a lot of campuses. There's 26 different schools, and we have 500,000 students, like 500,000, in all 5 boroughs. So it gets kind of difficult to get together on one campus sometimes. But what I found is the University Student Senate, CUNY University Student Senate, has been really, it's actually part of your student activity fee goes every year to this governing body that's run by students. They actually have, the chair of this governing body sits as a voting member of the Board of Trustees. So they're in concert with the Board of Trustees and also in communication with them. There's borough hearings. So every borough, every single year, has a hearing with presidents of the borough as well as Board of Trustees members from the CUNY Board of Trustees. And you can go to these, they're public. If they tell you no, tell them that you know that you're allowed, because you're allowed to speak as the public for 3 minutes and to testify on whatever you want. And that's what we did. Actually, this picture was from the Hostos Community College and the Bronx Community borough hearing. So there's that. And then additionally, the University Student Senate has a lot of different a lot of different student groups that they do support. So there's a disabilities a group that is very, very active. So they have been super active, and that kind of overlaps in terms of the student rights organizations that they support, also advocacy for different issues. So Title IX being a big issue in the last couple years. University Student Senate trained, I think they trained all the incoming freshmen on consent, which is, to me, it was phenomenal that they got that, but it was, part of it was an initiative working with state senators and also with getting the student governments to participate and kind of get all their students on board. So those types of issues, I think, can be dealt with in a broader sense. The University Student Senate is super supportive, and they deal with a bunch of different issues, and they've been really supportive with CUNY Divest in the past.
You're working on the new issue of the, starting it up, right, the newspaper? Yeah, we started, I did it again this in the summer, and you're working on it with us, so hopefully we'll have a club and we'll have a newspaper by the election. We have to have something to come out before the election. It would be kind of ridiculous not to have a student newspaper with a presidential election year, so it's tough.
I just want to share with you, I don't know if you're aware that one of our biggest problems in this whole movement is the labor movement. I don't know if people are aware of it. We've had that's where Trade Unions for Energy Democracy is really helpful in talking about this whole just transition process. I just came back from North Dakota. We brought all these people wearing our red ponchos, our NYSNA ponchos there now. But the biggest problem there were the building trades. The building trades were pushing, pushing for the pipeline. Not just that, this whole sort of job survival issue. In the Bronx, there was a plan to put a fresh direct diesel plant in an area which would increase pollution, where we have, as I said, the highest asthma rates in the nation. And the borough president and other politicians were in full support of it because it was going to provide jobs. So we do have a problem with the fact that the economy is where it is, and many people feel that these are their jobs, and what kind of jobs are they going to have? So it's important that whatever we do around divestment or around getting rid of fossil fuels is having this demand. And we had a big problem. I was in Paris at the COP21 talks. We couldn't even get it in the preamble. We couldn't getting the concept of just transition, where we're really talking about people being employed with good paying jobs in the clean energy field, because a lot of these jobs are minimum wage jobs, is something that's very important for people to be conscious of, because there is the AFL-CIO came out against the protests in North Dakota, and wanted the companies to strong-arm the native people. It was just horrible.
But that's where the nurses have been in the forefront across the board, whether it's Sandy and the California Nurses Association, extremely progressive. And it's a public health issue. Public health transcends
But the AFL-CIO is
narrow, myopic job. I mean, you're getting a job in polluting the environment and creating more asthma with children. I mean, Robert Moses that's the reason Cross Bronx Expressway, so many schools in the South Bronx are there within 200 yards. Half the schools are within the
I'm
Cross
just
Bronx
saying that part
Expressway.
of the, when we do it, it's really important to say this demand has to be part of this, so people know that they're being supported. And that's been a big challenge and a problem for us, not just in this country, but even in other parts of the world. So I just want people to be aware of this. It's a big, big issue.
Just to add to what you said, and I think it's really, really important, I think it's also important for folks to know that there was a very strong movement in the South Bronx against the opening of that fresh direct depot, around issues of environmental justice, right? And for
Took
decent
so much flack
jobs.
from people around our position on that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Well, the South Bronx Community Congress, I worked with them a couple of years ago. They're very active in trying to, there was a incinerator that was being built a number of years ago, and there was huge protests. And it's a constant
it's linked
struggle
to
because-
it's linked to gentrification as well. I mean,
Right.
there's a movement to try, areas that are desolate, the community wants a green area built. That doesn't happen until they move everyone out. And
Right.
then all of a sudden, look at Battery Park City. I mean, things are linked, but it's important to, the thing we say, there's no jobs on a dead planet. Putting meat behind that, where people who are really strong advocates for the environment really should keep that in the demand. Even in the march in Philadelphia that we participated in, we said, you have to put something about just transition in terms of jobs in here. Because, we just have to be, I just feel like people need to be conscious of that. It's a big problem.
Well, why not cite the Jacobson report, which we often cited, which showed that the jobs created through the removing fossil fuels would be much more productive, because a lot of the fossil fuel industry, especially these pipelines, involve energy that are taken from outside the state, and there is no job creation. You'd create a tremendous amount of jobs. I'm sorry, that report came out, 15 scientists from all over, and for some reason it was lost, and they had a specific passage devoted to job creation.
I've actually got it here.
Yeah, you have it, okay. you
Yeah,
can read
so New York State's all-purpose energy can be derived from wind, water, and sunlight. The conversion reduces New York State end-use power demand by 37%. The plan creates more jobs than lost, since most energy will be from in-state. The plan creates long-term energy price stability, since fuel costs will be zero. And the plan decreases air pollution deaths by 4,000 a year, which is a cost of $33 billion a year, or 3% of New York State's GDP. So this is the energy policy. This is from Energy Policy. It's examining the feasibility of converting New York State's all-purpose energy infrastructure to one using wind, water, and sunlight. It was Mark Jacobson. Stanford University was involved. Cornell University was involved. Institute of Transportation Studies, UC Davis, PSE, Healthy Energy, another institute, a School of Civil and Environmental Engineering at Cornell University. So there's a lot of scientists and engineers that were involved in making this assessment and kind of showing that it was possible to transition New York State over to a completely just
I believe that
sun,
one of
water.
the pipelines was coming from Pennsylvania, and they were using the kind of gas which is the most polluting and bringing it into New York State. I mean, it was absurd.
I think it had the highest content, like nuclear, not,
Methane?
no, it was, there's something nuclear about it, like if you were to burn it, it would, radon, I think it had the highest radon content.
That was
Which-
radon.
Which
That's right.
is a gas
That's
that,
right.
if you know anything about it, it's really toxic, and it's heavy, so it falls down to the ground. So their concern was that if you were burning natural gas in your home, it would start killing your children and your pets first.
Kids or pets go first.
Well, it depends how old the pets, children are. So, if you have babies crawling around on the ground, their concern was that it would be a really big health hazard to children.
This is the pipeline that goes
Marcellus
through
Shale.
Chelsea.
Yeah, that was the one that they
The
planned on.
Marcellus Shale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
The Spectra pipeline.
Right.
That's, it's ridiculous.
Well, sir, because
Mexican
one of the
money.
fights we lost, or I think we lost up in Albany the last couple of years, was there are 3 very small old coal plants still functioning in New York State. Now, as I said before, no one's going back to coal, but there's 3 small coal plants. And because of the argument, those towns can't afford to